Okay, 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Let's get right into it, and we will start in verse 2. You are a letter written in our hearts, known and read by all men, being manifested that you are a letter of Christ, cared for by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. Such confidence we have through Christ toward God. Not that we are adequate in ourselves to consider anything as coming from ourselves, but our adequacy is from God, who also made us adequate as servants of a new covenant. Not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. All right, now this is a little bit strange trying to put all these different references. What is this? Written with ink, not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God. So let's kind of break this down a little bit. You are a letter written in our hearts, known and read by all men, being manifest that you are a letter of Christ. Okay. Cared for by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God. Not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. See, in the first century, they are covenantal people. They are thinking of their relationship with God as far as following a covenant, not following the New Testament. The New Testament doesn't even exist at this point in time. So their mindset is about following this new covenant. And if you know the Old Covenant is basically the Ten Commandments written on stone, written by God's own finger. But in the New Covenant, go to Jeremiah 31 through 34, it talks about, it's the only passage in the Old Testament that talks about new covenant, at least using those terms together. And in there he says God will write his law, he will put it in their minds and write it on their hearts. Okay, so the new covenant is God writing his law upon our hearts. Well, what law is that? Well, that law is the law of Christ. Paul talks about in other places. But what is that law? Well, the law that Jesus claims is his is in John 13:34, also in John 15:12. He says, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. And then he goes to the cross. So in this new agreement with God, this new covenant that we have with God, Christ is our only mediator, and through understanding him, understanding his Spirit, he says, abide in me, he says, I am the vine, you are the branches. And he talks about, this new covenant before he dies at the Last Supper. He talks about taking this bread that represents his body and this wine that represents his blood, this blood of a new covenant. All of this is this idea of partaking of his Spirit, particularly his Spirit that goes to the cross, right? Because at the Last Supper, that's the night before he goes to the cross. He wants them to remember him and partake particularly of the love that he is demonstrating. Read John 15:12 and following, talks about his love for them. And that's why his desire is for them to develop that love. So let's finish this. Verse 4, such confidence we have through Christ toward God, not that we are adequate in ourselves to consider anything as coming from ourselves, but our adequacy is from God, who also made us adequate as servants of a new covenant. Okay, there's that word, new covenant. And he is a servant of it. It says, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. Right? Sometimes we go, I got to do everything according to the New Testament, which is really a bunch of letters at this point in time. Yes, they're inspired, but they are still letters. And he says, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Okay, so this idea, let me put it into a visual here for you, is this new covenant is this idea of understanding or comparing ourselves, partaking of, examining ourselves, and comparing his spirit to my spirit. Do I have that kind of love? Do I have that kind of courage? Do I have that kind of joy, peace, right? It's about developing Christ within us. That's why Paul says things like in Galatians 2:20, "It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." And 1 John 1:7 talks about walk in the light as he is in the light. Everything is about this idea of following Christ, developing this greater connection. That's what the New Testament is really about. I remember the New Testament is a collection of letters written in the first century, a couple of decades basically after the church started at Pentecost. And the role of the New Testament is simply the building up of this relationship, our relationship with Christ. He is our mediator with God, not the New Testament. Christ is our one mediator. So there's a difference between the New Covenant and the New Testament. The word New Testament isn't even in the Bible, but New Covenant certainly is. So if you want to know more about this New Covenant, you can go to a course here. 2 Corinthians chapter 3 is quite revealing on the nature of the two covenants, the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. Also, 1 Corinthians 11 and Hebrews 7 and 8 talk about this New Covenant. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful. God bless.